The rain struck the tin roof like a relentless typewriter, tapping out the same story over and over again, one of struggle, hunger, and quiet resilience. The one-bedroom home sat on the edge of a forgotten street in the southern corner of the city, where the lights flickered during storms and buses rarely came on time. Inside, the dim glow of a single lamp revealed the silhouette of a girl hunched over a cracked kitchen table, surrounded by papers, sticky notes, and an outdated laptop she'd bought at a thrift store with 3 weeks' worth of part-time wages. The world outside didn't care about her dreams. The rent notices taped to the front door didn't care that she'd just aced another accounting exam. The people who stared at her on the university campus didn't care that she had built a business plan more detailed than half their parents' portfolios. She was invisible to them, the quiet girl who took notes in the back of class, who wore the same jacket every winter, who skipped meals more often than she admitted. But she remembered everything. Every snide comment, every teacher who overlooked her, every time someone told her she should lower her expectations, that she should be grateful just to be accepted at all. She was done with grateful. At 18, she understood numbers better than most entrepreneurs. At 19, she filed her first LLC. By 20, she was flipping online storefronts, reinvesting every dollar, and calculating risk like her life depended on it, because it did. Her mother had fallen ill. Medical bills towered over them like skyscrapers, and no one was coming to help. She didn't have an uncle in real estate or a cousin on Wall Street. All she had was her mind, her discipline, and an unwavering refusal to surrender. While other students partied on weekends, she built spreadsheets. While they posted vacations, she posted product listings. Her hands trembled from fatigue, her stomach growled from skipped dinners, but she kept going, because she knew one day, all of this pain would become capital. She wasn't hustling for luxury. She was fighting for freedom. The first win came quietly. A modest drop-shipping store sold off for $8,000. Then another for $12,000. She reinvested, always reinvested, never spending a cent she didn't have to. When she spoke, people still interrupted. When she entered banks, they still called her Miss instead of Ma'am. But the zeros in her account began to add up. She moved out of the neighborhood, but the lessons followed. She learned silence was a weapon, that humility was strategic, that pride came later after the contracts were signed, after the deeds were recorded. By the time she was 24, she had a portfolio silent investments in boutique hotels, wellness brands, and digital real estate. Still, she kept her name off the headlines. Power grew faster in the shadows. The city didn't know her name, but it felt her presence. Boardrooms whispered when she entered. Brokers responded when she called. A few former classmates tried to reconnect, their messages filled with curiosity and fake warmth. She ignored them. She had no time for nostalgia, only forward motion. Then came the acquisition call. It was just another meeting, another deal, or so it seemed. A struggling hotel in the heart of downtown had a prime floor for sale. The price was high, the timing bad, but the location perfect. Her advisors warned against it. She didn't listen. Something about it felt symbolic. It was the same hotel she had once passed on her way to school, staring at the chandeliers through the glass like they belonged to another world. She bought the entire floor in under 48 hours. No press, no announcement, just a quiet wire transfer and a name filed under her holding company. She didn't need attention. She needed the keys. When the deal closed, the property manager asked if she'd like to visit. She said yes, and that's how she ended up in the lobby, years after being told she'd never belong in places like this. Years after being ignored, dismissed, underestimated. The irony wasn't lost on her when the concierge looked her up and down, when the manager approached with a clipboard, assuming she was lost. It wasn't just a purchase. It was a full-circle moment, a declaration without words. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She just smiled, handed them the ownership documents, and watched as the air shifted. Because now the floor was hers, and her story was only just beginning. The keycard slid into the elevator panel with a quiet beep, unlocking access to the top floor. The doors closed with a slow whisper, sealing her away from the murmurs below, the whispers of doubt, and the gazes that still couldn't reconcile the reality of who she was. She stood there alone, not in silence, but in reflection. The mirrored walls around her didn't show someone lucky. They showed someone forged in the pressure of poverty, expectation, and resistance. The elevator climbed, floor by floor, each number glowing like a checkpoint in a life that had never been linear. Her earliest memories weren't of toys or vacations, they were of quiet nights in crowded apartments, of tiptoeing past eviction notices, of watching her mother juggle jobs just to keep the water running. There were no handouts, no connections, no mentors. Only her mother's words whispered in exhaustion, "Make them see you, baby. Make them listen even when they don't want to." She had done just that, not through anger or noise, but through precision. Every step of her journey had been calculated. Not to impress, not to fit in, but to take up space, to claim rooms they said weren't for her. This hotel wasn't the first, and it wouldn't be the last. But it was different. Personal. Emotional. Transformational. The doors opened. The hallway was quiet, carpeted in thick velvet gray. A distant hum of air vents and the low click of her heels were the only sounds. To anyone else, it would seem like just another luxury floor. But to her, every door was a trophy. Every suite a monument. Not to wealth, but to resistance. Each square foot was a defiance of every time someone had laughed at her ideas, denied her loans, or asked if she was in the right building. She walked slowly, her hand brushing the textured wallpaper. There was power in this silence. Not the kind shouted from stages or plastered across social media. The kind earned, the kind no one could take. In one of the corner suites, she paused. This was the one. The exact room they refused to let her enter 10 years ago. She had been 16, curious, and too bold for her own good. She'd asked to use the restroom during a scholarship event being hosted in one of the ballrooms. A manager had stopped her, demanded a chaperone, then escorted her to the public restroom in the basement. She remembered the humiliation, but more than that, she remembered the promise she made to herself that day. One day, I'll own a key to the doors you won't open for me. Now she had all the keys. The suite opened with a soft click. Sunlight poured in through floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the room in gold. Marble countertops, velvet armchairs, and curated art adorned the space. But she wasn't looking at the decor. She was thinking of her mother. Of the nights they slept in shelters. Of the day she sold her only gold bracelet to pay for her daughter's college textbook. Of the call they shared when she made her first $10,000 and the voicemail she still kept saved from the day before her mother passed. "I told you they'd have to see you one day." She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Instead, she sat on the edge of the grand bed and opened her laptop. Business didn't pause for sentiment. A new deal was closing in Dubai. Another hotel chain had reached out. Her team needed her review on the latest architecture pitch. The world kept moving, but now it moved around her. The phone on the suite's nightstand rang. She picked it up without thinking. "Ms. Ayana? We just wanted to confirm you'll be staying the night on your floor. We've upgraded the entire team to accommodate your preferences." She smiled faintly. "No," she replied, her voice calm. "I won't be staying. I just came to see what I bought." She hung up. Not out of rudeness, but to end the conversation on her terms, something she had learned to do in boardrooms where men interrupted her. In banks where she was asked if she was the assistant, and in restaurants where staff automatically handed the check to the man beside her. She stood and walked to the window. Below, the city stretched out in glittering lights and moving taxis. It looked different from here, quieter, tamer, almost manageable. She didn't see a skyline. She saw a map. A battlefield of places that once said no and would now have to say yes. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about rewriting the rules. Not just for her, but for every girl watching from the margins. For every young black woman told to be realistic. For every entrepreneur passed over because her name sounded too unfamiliar. For every time she was treated as an exception instead of the rule. She didn't want a seat at the table anymore. She wanted the deed to the building. And she had it. The morning after her visit to the hotel floor she now owned, Ayana stood in a room she hadn't entered in years, not since the day of her mother's funeral. The old house had been locked, preserved like a museum of struggle and determination. Dust coated the corners, light flickered in the cracked ceiling fixture, and the refrigerator still buzzed, stubbornly holding on. She had bought the building years ago, quietly transferring the deed from the slumlord who once threatened to evict them. She paid triple the market value, not because it was worth it, but because the look on his face when she signed the check was. She didn't renovate it. She kept it exactly the same, a time capsule. The peeling wallpaper, the warped floorboards, even the old kettle with the broken lid still sat on the stove. Because this place wasn't about comfort. It was a monument to where she came from. The world saw penthouses and power suits. She saw midnight cries on the bathroom floor and the sound of her mother praying when she thought her daughter was asleep. She walked into her old bedroom and sat on the edge of the creaky bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. She remembered staring at that same spot when the hunger pangs were so sharp she couldn't sleep. When she tried to study with a flashlight under the blanket to save electricity. When she wrote her first business idea in a dollar store notebook, dreaming of a day she'd never have to beg anyone for permission to exist. Ayana pulled out her phone and opened a message draft she had written but never sent, a letter to her teenage self. Dear girl in the torn sneakers and second-hand jacket. They will laugh. They will point. They will tell you you're dreaming too big. But keep going. Because one day, the places that locked you out will send you invitations. The rooms where they ignored your ideas will become your boardrooms. You won't just be a guest. You'll be the owner. She hit save. Not send. It wasn't time yet. Later that day, she met her team at the high-rise office downtown. The windows wrapped around the top floor, overlooking the city skyline she once thought was untouchable. Her assistant greeted her with a list of appointments, a development proposal in Singapore, an art hotel concept in Cape Town, and an urgent request from a European conglomerate that wanted to buy into her holding group. But Ayana's focus wasn't on the paperwork. It was on a name that had come across her desk, the manager of the hotel she had just bought into. The same one who years ago had publicly humiliated her, escorting her out of the lobby like a trespasser. He had no idea she now owned the very floor he worked under. And still, she didn't want revenge. She wanted clarity. She called the hotel and arranged a private lunch in the main restaurant. No entourage. No cameras. Just her and the man who once asked if she had wandered into the wrong building. He arrived late, confused, nervous, unsure who he was meeting. When he saw her at the table by the window, he froze. She wore a simple suit, no jewelry, no assistance. Just presence. He approached slowly, offering a stiff, professional greeting. She nodded and gestured for him to sit. The silence that followed was electric. He tried to recall their past meeting, fumbling for words. She let him speak, watching his discomfort grow. Then, calmly, she reached into her bag and slid a copy of the deed across the table. No explanation, just a fact. The building they sat in, at least part of it, belonged to her. His mouth opened, then closed. Apologies stumbled from his lips, but Ayana stopped him with a raised hand. Not to forgive, not to punish, but to teach. You never know who you're speaking to, she said softly. So treat everyone like they matter. Then she stood, leaving the lunch untouched. She didn't need validation. She had something far more powerful, perspective. She wasn't the same girl he dismissed. She was the lesson he'd never forget. Outside the hotel, her driver waited. As she stepped into the car, her assistant handed her a folder. They confirmed the keynote. You'll be the closing speaker. Ayana nodded. The Global Equity Conference, the largest of its kind. Thousands of attendees. Millions watching. She'd be the final voice on a panel filled with names that once dismissed her. CEOs, investors, politicians. People who never saw her coming. That night, she stood before the mirror in her suite. Not in the hotel she bought, that was behind her. This time, she was in a different tower. A new acquisition. One step closer to something bigger than ownership. Legacy. She wasn't just proving them wrong anymore. She was building a world where girls like her never had to prove anything at all. The ballroom shimmered beneath a cascade of glass chandeliers, their reflections glittering in polished marble as if the very ceiling were raining light. Rows of chairs curved neatly toward the stage, where a backdrop screen bore her name in gold. Ayana J. Reid, keynote speaker, Global Equity Summit. It was the kind of moment that looked like the end of a long journey, but for her it was only a checkpoint. A pause in the rise, not the climax. She stood backstage, unmoving, while executives and organizers whispered logistics into earpieces and fidgeted with clipboards. She wasn't nervous. She had learned long ago that power didn't come from volume or posture. It came from presence. And hers filled the room before she even stepped onto the stage. Years earlier, she would have been among the crowd, maybe even at the very back, watching speakers whose names carried more weight than hers, wearing a borrowed blazer and rehearsing her questions in silence. But today, she didn't need to ask for the microphone. She was the microphone. A stage manager gestured to her. Showtime. Ayana stepped out, and the silence that met her was different from the silence of dismissal. This was reverence, recognition. Every camera turned, every phone lifted, every gaze focused. She didn't smile for effect. She didn't wave. She walked to the podium like a woman who knew that every step was history correcting itself. She spoke, and the room listened. She didn't talk about statistics. Not at first. She talked about the rooms she had been locked out of, the times her emails were ignored, the meetings where she was mistaken for catering, the investor pitches where her ideas were stolen, softened, or dismissed. She didn't share these stories to evoke pity. She shared them to draw a straight line from then to now, from what was denied to what was taken back. Ethically, strategically, permanently. She talked about the floor she had purchased in the luxury hotel, about the quiet message it sent to every young girl watching from the sidelines, about ownership not just as wealth but as autonomy, about how equity isn't just a financial term, it's a right and a weapon and a promise. And she ended, not with applause lines or performative hope, but with a question. If the system won't open the doors, what happens when we start owning the buildings? The applause that followed wasn't just loud. It was thunderous, carried something deeper than admiration, carried belief. Backstage, as cameras tried to follow her, Ayanna moved past them. She didn't stay for interviews. She didn't pose for press. Her car waited, the engine already running, and she slid inside like someone who'd done it 1,000 times because visibility was no longer her goal. Leverage was. Her phone buzzed. A message from her legal team. Offer accepted. Closing documents incoming. The building in question? A historic hotel in Manhattan. The one where, 8 years ago, security had been called because she sat too long in the lobby without ordering a drink. She smiled. Ownership wasn't revenge. It was correction. It was the quiet rewriting of narratives that once tried to bury her. She arrived at her downtown office just past noon. Her staff stood, surprised. She rarely came in person these days, but today was different. She walked through the glass doors, past the sleek reception desk, and entered the central conference room where a new generation of interns sat in training. Some of them were like she once was, quiet, unsure, eager. Others were bold already, prepared to speak, ready to take space. All of them stopped when they saw her. She didn't deliver a speech. She didn't give a lecture. She simply said, "Come with me." And one by one they followed her through the elevator to the roof where the city stretched before them. She pointed out buildings, names, streets, deals, explained how the skyline could be mapped by equity. She didn't talk about dreams. She talked about strategies, because inspiration fades, but blueprints endure. And she was building more than a legacy now. She was building successors. She looked at them. The interns, the staff, the young minds who had no idea that one day they'd be standing here alone, carrying the torch. "Look carefully," she said. "This isn't just a view. It's a plan." That night, she walked alone through the city. No driver, no assistant, just her and the skyline. She passed the hotel again, the one that had denied her, then sold to her. The doorman opened the door now, smiling without recognition. She walked past, unseen and in control. Because some victories don't need announcements. Some just need doors that finally open with your name on the key. The sun was barely rising when Ayanna stepped off the private jet, the tarmac in Nairobi still damp from the night's rain. Her team had offered to accompany her, but she declined. This trip was personal. Not because of a deal, not because of press, but because of the land. A stretch of soil just outside the city where her ancestors had once been buried, where stories had once been whispered under stars instead of published in Forbes. She was here to break ground on her most ambitious project yet. Not another hotel, not another luxury tower, but a leadership institute. A physical place carved out of legacy for Black girls across the world who were tired of asking for permission to lead. She didn't want to just buy buildings. She wanted to build futures. The air here felt different. It wasn't polished and conditioned like the lobbies of the elite. It was honest, humid, fragrant with the scent of red earth and promise. She stepped into a waiting SUV, greeted by an elder woman from the local council who had coordinated the community partnership. The woman took her hand, calloused and strong, and said simply, "You came back." Ayana nodded, not with fanfare, not with entourage, with intention. They drove in silence, past grazing goats, open markets, and stretches of unpaved road until they reached the hillside. The land was vast, open, wild, not yet tamed by blueprints and construction crews. It looked like a blank canvas. But to her it was already drawn. She stepped out, her heels sinking slightly into the soft ground. Around her, young girls gathered, some holding notebooks, others barefoot, wide-eyed, watching this woman who looked like them, but who had traveled a world most of them had never imagined. She saw herself in every one of them, not because of skin tone or gender, but because of that fire in their eyes, that unspoken hunger to be seen, to be chosen. Ayana knelt in the dirt and dug her hand into the soil. It stained her palm. It grounded her more than any skyscraper ever had. A few meters away, workers began raising the frame for the welcome center. The architects were on site, drones hovered, camera crews prepped a documentary. But Ayana didn't look at any of that. Her eyes were on the girls. She walked to them, sat on a low wall, and began to speak. Not as a mogul, not as a speaker, as someone who had once been told, "You can't afford this." She told them about the time she pretended to be a hotel intern just to sneak into a conference she couldn't afford. About the professor who said she wasn't cut out for finance. About the VC firm that laughed when she pitched her first hotel equity fund. And about the day she signed the deed that gave her the right to walk into that very firm's boardroom and buy 32% of their portfolio. They listened, not because of the drama, but because of the truth. And when she was done, one of the youngest girls, no older than 7, raised her hand. "Do we have to look rich to be smart?" Ayana's throat tightened. She crouched down, eye-to-eye with her. "No," she said. "You just have to remember you're already worth more than anyone can see." Later, at the ceremonial ribbon cutting, reporters asked her what the school would focus on. She said, "This isn't just about teaching leadership. It's about undoing the damage. About reminding these girls that they were never behind, just placed in the wrong frame." And she meant every word. That evening, she sat in her guest house watching the sun set over the trees. Her assistant called, reminding her she had an interview with a major network the next morning. She agreed, but with a condition: the first question must not be about her net worth. Because the numbers were irrelevant now. They had always chased the wrong metrics. Impact had no ledger. Dignity had no stock ticker. And legacy couldn't be printed in Forbes. It had to be felt like warm soil through your fingers. Like a girl's smile when she realizes she belongs. That night, Ayana slept with the windows open, listening to the soft hum of a place that had waited years for her to return. Not as a visitor, as an architect of something bigger. Winter in New York brought with it a kind of silence that blanketed the city in both elegance and urgency. The streets were aglow with reflections of high-end boutiques, twinkling lights, and hurried footsteps of people chasing deadlines and reservations. At the corner of 51st and Madison stood the hotel, her hotel now one of the most exclusive properties on the East Coast. It had recently undergone a full renovation, discreetly overseen by her team. Not a single media outlet had covered it. No press releases, no investor alerts. Ayana didn't need the spotlight. She built her empire in shadows and signatures. The lobby had changed since her first encounter years ago. Where there had once been cold white marble and staff with eyes full of suspicion, there now stood warm wood textures, locally curated art, and a reception desk staffed by professionals trained in dignity, not judgment. It wasn't just aesthetic. It was ideological. Every policy, every practice, every promotion, redesigned to eliminate quiet discrimination. Ayana didn't just buy the building. She rewrote its DNA. Tonight, however, wasn't about the hotel. It was about what came next. She stepped into the executive suite, where a private gathering of global philanthropists and investors had assembled at her invitation. The skyline sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her, but no one was looking at the view. They were all focused on her. She stood by the fireplace, dressed in black, not for mourning, but for declaration. Her hair braided back in precision, her expression calm, measured, impossible to look away from. In her hand was a dossier thick with signatures and stamped agreements. "This," she said, her voice soft but resonant, "is what legacy looks like." She distributed copies across the glass table. Inside was the blueprint for her newest foundation, one not limited by geography or bureaucracy. It would offer unrestricted seed capital to underrepresented founders, education fellowships for first-generation girls, legal aid for women fighting systemic discrimination, and a mentorship pipeline so precise it could replace centuries of nepotism. No applications, no waiting lists, only referrals from trusted networks and AI-based data from public school systems. It would bypass the gatekeepers, because Ayanna had learned no matter how much she owned, the gatekeepers would always build new gates. So now she was removing them. Entirely. As her guests absorbed the details, she stepped out onto the terrace. The cold air bit against her cheeks, but she welcomed it. Below, the city pulsed with life. She could see it all, the subway lines that carried tired dreamers, the restaurants filled with laughter and exclusion, the banks that still decided futures behind closed doors. She'd been locked out of all of them. And now? She could buy the block. But that wasn't the goal. Not anymore. She pulled out her phone and opened a map, a global one, filled with markers, Lagos, Sao Paulo, Detroit, Mumbai. Each represented an active project. Each represented a woman being handed the pen to write her own narrative. Behind her, the doors slid open. Her assistant stepped out. They've all signed. Ayanna nodded. Not out of excitement, but confirmation. It had begun. The next day, a major publication tried to run a story titled From Poor Girl to Powerhouse. She called and declined the interview. Because that narrative was lazy. She had never been poor. She had been resource-rich and system-starved. And now she wasn't playing their game. She was building a new one. At midnight, she walked the corridors of the hotel one last time. Not as a guest. Not even as an owner. But as a keeper of memory. Each floor had its ghosts. Her job wasn't to exorcise them. It was to ensure no more were created. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and soundless, layering the sidewalks like blank pages. Ayanna smiled. Let the world write what it wanted. She was already drafting her next chapter. One no one would be able to ignore. And when they asked how she did it, how a black woman who had once been told, "You can't afford this hotel," came to own not just the floor, but the future, she would simply say, "I stopped asking. I started building."